Why does the human ego, in general, feel uncomfortable with silence? Why does, in general, the human ego feel uncomfortable with stillness? That is an interesting question. Silence and stillness is normally unacceptable in video productions like this. When was the last time that you saw a new uh, a news program on the television that had a lot of silence in it? Silence and stillness that scares the ego away. And that is why the tendency in videos on YouTube and elsewhere for that matter, the tendency is to cut out the gaps between the talking. So it ends up being like a machine gun. Shooting at full speed. Just talking, talking, talking. But why does the ego feel uncomfortable with silence? It is actually very simple. In silence, the ego ceases to exist. And that means that in most cases, when the ego is confronted with silence and stillness, then the ego starts to think desperately. What is happening? What is it that is going on? What is this? What does this mean? What does... And it does that in an attempt to not feel uncomfortable. That is why the ego craves entertainment. If the human ego does not get entertainment regularly, then the human ego is forced to create its own entertainment by thinking. And it will do thinking. But silence and stillness is important if we want to awaken. It is in silence and in stillness that we potentially rediscover ourselves. And that is not by thinking about it. You are not the thinking. You exist prior to any thought. You exist prior to any concept. So if you want to awaken and rediscover who you truly are, you have to let go of all concepts. You have to let go of the idea that thinking in any way is capable of defining who you are. And that is why stillness and silence is important. Thinking and speaking comes and goes, but you are here, completely independent of any concept, of any thinking, of any speaking. You are here. If you were the thinking, if you were the concepts, if you were the speaking, then you would simply disappear every time you were confronted with silence and stillness. But you don't. Why not be at least a little bit curious about what it is that is here when there is silence? And when I say be curious, I am not asking you to think about it. What I am asking you to, or what I am suggesting, is that you just simply observe. Just simply observe in the silent spaces. Notice that observing is still there, whether there is thinking or speaking. Notice that even in silence, there is still observing. What is that observing? Not what is being observed, but the observing itself. Turn that observing around and make it observe itself. The mind will get confused about that in the beginning, but stay with it in silence, and then you will notice that the mind starts speaking again to itself. But just simply notice that as well, and put the thinking aside. And then you might argue, yes, but it will come back. Absolutely. Then notice that and put it again aside. What can you not put aside? Is there something there that you cannot put aside? Yes, there is. The observing itself. And the mind might say, what's special about that? Well, the mind does not know much about that. But if we were to philosophize about it shortly, well, I could tell you that observing, that is the most special thing in the entire universe. And that observing is actually looking for itself. You see, we live in a culture where we as little children gets indoctrinated into turning our attention outwards, turning our attention towards things, towards stuff, trying to accumulate things and then identify with all that stuff. Searching for ourselves in the outer world. But you will never ever find yourself in things. Even if you were able to buy the entire earth, you would still not have bought yourself or bought access to knowing yourself. For you can never ever find yourself in things. And thinking, that is, thoughts, they are things too. You see, the thing the thing is with things. Things come and go. All things come and go. So all thoughts, they arise and then they subside again. Thoughts come and go. Distractions, they come and they go. Noise, come and go. Silence, stillness, does not come and go. And you might argue that when there is a lot of noise, then the silence is gone. No, the silence is still there. The silence is the very space that the noise is arising within. So fall in love with silence. Fall in love with stillness. You are essentially falling in love with yourself. What do you feel in these pauses with silence? What is it that pauses? Well, it's the noise. The silence never pauses. So what do you feel in silence? What do you experience? Boredom, perhaps. Boredom is a craving for distractions. It simply means that the mind has been programmed to crave distractions. And when the mind is programmed to crave distractions, then we live as puppets. Because there is a lot of distractions in this world. I don't know if you have noticed that. It is a huge industry. The industry of distractions. And mind you, I'm not saying that there is something wrong about entertainment. I'm not saying that. What I am saying, though, is that it is beneficial to know what it is that is going on. For if we do not know what it is that is going on, then we are indeed puppets. And puppets can be very easily manipulated with. They will, of course, deny it. But there is a lot of manipulation going on these days, more than ever. And the conditioned mind is fairly easy to manipulate. But that is not what is happening here. It is in fact the exact opposite. What is happening here is that I am trying to show you what it is that is going on. And if you see that clearly, then you will awaken. And when you awaken, you are no longer so easily being manipulated. You will in fact become almost impossible to manipulate. Freedom. Free at last. So what do you feel in these pauses with silence? Just simply watch it. Watch what is going on in the mind. As I said, it could be boredom. But for some it could also be anxiety. There is a lot of human beings who are carrying around with them repressed trauma. And that repressed trauma has a tendency to show up in silence or in stillness. Distractions is a way to try to forget. That is the very suppressing of the trauma. But when we awaken, we also shift the we shift our relationship with trauma, because we will no longer see ourselves as victims. We learn why we were traumatized, and a part of the traumatization, is that a word? Traumatizing, a part of that was the sleepwalking, was a result of us being easily manipulated, so we could have been tricked, perhaps for years, and suddenly discovering that is traumatizing. There are no freedom when we are identified with the thinking mind. We are stuck within a thought pattern that perpetuates itself. Awakening is what breaks that identification. And yes, I know that there are a lot of you sitting right now and listening to this, and you would probably cry out loud, "Yes, I want to awaken right now. Why does it not happen to me?" There are no answers to that question. It is completely impossible to guarantee anything. I cannot guarantee anything. I can talk about it, and you can listen. And as long as you are listening, the chances are that you suddenly see what it is that I am pointing at. The chances are much, much higher than if you just flee back to all the distractions. To all the distractions. I am confident that you will awaken eventually. Patience, my friend. And then fall in love with silence. Fall in love with stillness. That is what we are doing here at Awakeable. You are able to awaken, but you have to make yourself available. And you do that by listening and by falling in love with silence. Thank you, my friend. Take care.